she believes she understands what white supremacy is, how it works. I disagree, because listening to her, either that or she's just totally disingenuous. But hey, you know.
What is professionalism? What is intelligence? Whose stories are told by whom? Whose stories are not told, right? And I'm going to use an example from one form of oppression to launch us into the form we're here to talk about tonight. So we're here to talk about racism. I'm very clear you can't really separate these out. But for our purposes, we're going to take a focused look on racism. But I'm going to draw from an example from the form called sexism. And relax, I'm going to use dominant language because I'm going to use this the way our textbooks teach us. Right? So hang in there.
See, this when she finna get on some more of that bull. Trying to remove the white woman's role from the system of white supremacy. Nope, not gonna happen on my watch.
Women got the right to vote in this country in 1920. There was only one possible way that women could get the right to vote, and that was for men to give it to us.
And Black people still didn't have basic human rights in 1920. Black people in America did not have basic human rights in 1920 when white women got their right to vote. The system of white supremacy, which includes men and women, still oppressed and still is oppressing Black people.
Women couldn't vote on the right to vote. They couldn't even speak in many public forums to advocate for their right to vote.
White women could own slaves. White women could own slaves. They couldn't vote, but they could own slaves. Ooh, we can vote, but y'all own us. Say that. Talk about that as well.
Could a woman be prejudiced against a man and mean to him in a one-on-one interaction? Of course. Could women as a group literally deny every single man in the society his civil rights? No.
White women can do that to Black men. White women, with the collective force of white women backed by the collective force of white men, could deny Black men all of their rights. White women can do that.
No. Could men deny every woman in the society her civil rights? Yes. And that is a significant difference that must be acknowledged in language, right?
And remember, sorry to keep pausing, but it's she done got me going. Remember, this patriarchal system, like the system of white supremacy, it needs the involvement of its women for the culture to be passed down from generation to generation. So if white women don't buy into and support and help nurture and pass down this white patriarchal system, it wouldn't still exist. White women are just as complicit in the patriarchy and the system of white supremacy as white men. She needs to say that. Stop just trying to put it off on white men and make sure you involve or include all of the actions of white women and what they was doing to help back up the white man and keep the system of white supremacy going. Why are you leaving that out? Why are you trying to make it seem like it was only the white men? No, it wasn't. That white man's mother was racist as well. He was nurtured by the teats of white supremacy. Miss me with all that male stuff, just trying to be male centric. No, white women were just as complicit as the white men.
All right. So think about today. In 2019, I'm going to offer you a question. Today, if men as a group wanted to take away our right to vote, could they?
Yep.
Now that's a little easier to see today than it was about 10 years ago when I first started asking this question. But I have been asking this question for many years because this is the best example of the difference between individual prejudice and institutional power, when yours is backed. And most people, when I offer that question, there's confusion, they're not so clear. Some people are sure that they could, some are not, which is also part of how oppression works. So let me just show you some basic statistics from 2019. The Fortune 500 CEOs are 98% male. The 10 richest Americans are all men. 7 of them are the richest people in the world. I think economic power is probably the ultimate form. The presidency and the vice presidency has always been 100% male. The Senate, keep in mind, we're celebrating the most diverse Senate Congress we've ever had. 75% male, House of Representatives, 70% male, the current cabinet, 84% male, US mayors, 80% male, US governors, 84% male, federal judges, 87% male, police officers, 85% male.
I guarantee you 85 to 90% of those white men or white males she's talking about are married to a white woman, which means white women still benefit directly from the dominance of white men. And then let's talk about how white women been dominating black women. White women have basically been wiping their butts with the souls of black women since we got here. And we keep trying to act like they've been our allies. She's speaking as if she's from a historical ally standpoint. No, tell the full truth. That's my problem with this. And there might be some people who disagree with me. Cool, but this is me. This is what I'm gathering from this. It's disingenuous. You're not telling the full truth. You got to talk about that. Talk about white supremacy as a full system. Don't just talk about white supremacy from one end. What did white women do as well?
So just ask you again, if they wanted to. I'm not saying they would. My point is, by definition, institutional power is deeply embedded in the fabric of society. It's embedded across history. These are not flexible systems. Heads up, we live in patriarchy. We live in an androcentric, male-dominated.
We live in white supremacy. We live in white supremacy, which is propped up by both white men and white women. Yeah, Robin.
Patriarchal society we always have, and it didn't end in 1920.
And the patriarchal system is also supported by both white men and white women. Robin.
I'm very confident that if Hillary Clinton had become president, patriarchy wasn't going to end that day anymore. I mean, if the word patriarchy came out of her mouth, any more than we can see that racism did not end upon Obama's presidency. I would argue it got an infusion. All systems of oppression can allow for exceptions. The rule will be consistent.
I agree.
2019. And just in case you need a visual on my claim that we live in patriarchy, this is the House Freedom.
I guarantee you all these men, or the majority of these men, are married to white women. And these white women and their white families and all the other white kids and stuff directly benefit from the dominance of these white men.
Caucus. This is arguably the most powerful committee in the nation. Talk about making decisions at the table that will affect the lives of people who are not at that table. They're literally discussing the healthcare bill when this picture was taken. Right? In case you need an image from popular culture, this is cover of Vanity Fair. This is a slide I made. I don't even know who it is. I just Googled white guy. And I got this, and I thought, oh, that's a good one. If you have young people in your life, and if you have kind of self-awareness yourself, you know that children are deeply shaped by films, by media, by imagery and marketing, right? The way that they think about the world and understand the world. And all of us pretty much have been deeply shaped by film. Those who write and direct film are our cultural narrators, and they shape how we see ourselves and how we see ourselves in relation to other people. And of the 100 top grossing films of all time across the world disseminated from the US, 99 were directed by men. And 95 of them white. Institutional power is the ability to disseminate your worldview to everyone.
She's being a bit disingenuous as well, because she's only looking at male-dominated spaces. So there are female-dominated spaces as well. There are industries where women vastly outnumber men and vastly outperform men in those realms. So I'm not saying that there's that the categories or the realms that women dominate far exceed men, far outweigh the number of industries that men dominate. I'm not saying that, but I am saying you do have to show the full picture. You can't just show a portion of, because that's the slant to it, right? And that's what makes it disingenuous. That's the slant. There are men dominate most of these industries, but these are a lot of male dominated industries. Because she made me think about like looking at the NBA versus the WNBA, and the idea is the NBA is supported more because of patriarchy. Well, no, women aren't interested in mass and basketball like that. They don't dominate this industry, but there are industries where women do dominate. So at least show that, say, hey, these are the industries that the males dominate, but women do have these industries that we dominate. And if you look at those, most of the women who dominate those industries are what type of women? What racial classification? White women. So white men and white women both dominate the majority of these labor industries. White supremacy as a whole.
Everyone, and to shape how they see themselves, how they see you, how they see themselves in relationship to you. To tell the story of the other, when you are not in relationship with the other, when you don't know the other, to be able to represent the other, and to do it and position yourself as simply telling universal human stories, not from any particular position. So that Mike Lee is a film director who makes films about the human condition, and Spike Lee is a Black film director who makes films about Black issues. So Facebook puts these things out on holidays. This one came out to commemorate the anniversary of women gaining suffrage. And then some folks did this. Which women got access to the vote in 1920? Yeah, white women. So another dimension of institutional power is that your group's experience is held up as universal. So while we were oppressed as women, we were certainly privileged as white. There is no more universal woman's experience than there is a universal human experience on the physical plane where we live in the here and now. Right? And that recognition, I'm sure many of you know, was termed by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, intersectionality. Right? All right, so legal authority.
No, you only got one slide. Come on, Robin, you only got one slide on that. You're just gonna briefly touch on it, Robin. You're just gonna briefly touch on the advantages white women get over all other women, especially Black women, and how white women have been using the souls of Black women as their tissue since Black women got here. You just gonna briefly discuss it. You spent a couple slides on the patriarchy. You're going to briefly discuss this? No, tell the full story of how white women been about that bullshit too.
And institutional control is what transforms people's prejudice into a far-reaching system. So let's look at race in 2019, right? So the presidency and vice presidency, 100% white. The US Senate, 91% white. I just have to point out again, the most diverse Congress we've ever had. The House of Representatives, 73% white. The current cabinet, 89% white. The governors, 98% white. Mayors, 88% white. Military advisors, just think about who we go to war with. 100% white. Federal judges, 88% white. Police officers, 80% white. The people who decide which TV shows we see, 93% white. The people who decide which books we read, 90% white. People who decide which news is covered, 85% white. People who decide which music is produced, 95% white. School teachers, 82% white. Full-time college professors, 84% white. Owners of men's pro football teams, 97% white. Owners of men's pro basketball teams, 98% white. The players, 75% Black. Right? And yet, what is the definition of a racist, of what it means to be racist in the mainstream? Right? Well, it's an individual, always an individual, not a system, who consciously does not like people based on race. Apparently, if it's not conscious, it doesn't count. And is intentionally mean to them. It also has to be intentional to count. Individual, conscious malintent across race. That is a racist. And I don't know that you could come up with a better definition to protect the system of racism than this one. Because this definition makes it virtually impossible to talk to the...
I could think of something, trying to act like white women have always been an ally to Black people is another thing that helps further the system of white supremacy. It also protects white supremacy, trying to act like white women didn't own slaves, like white women didn't brutalize slaves, like white women have just from the beginning been these allies to Black people and been fighting the system of white supremacy in mass. That's another thing that helps to protect the system of white supremacy, to only point the finger at the white man. No, white man, woman, and child.
The average white person about the inevitable absorption of a racist worldview that we get from living in a culture in which it is infused and embedded across all its institutions, right? I think that this definition is the root of virtually all white defensiveness on this topic. Have you guys noticed any white defensiveness on this topic? Because if that's my definition of a racist, and you've just suggested I've said or done something racist, much less that I benefit from racist just by being white, what I'm going to hear is you just question my very moral character. And now I need to defend my moral character, right? And I will, right? So racism is a system, not an event. It certainly occurs in specific moments that we can identify, but of course it's 365, 24/7. It's the system we're in.
I can't even say that name, but I wonder where they got that definition from.
And part of being raised as a white person in this society has been to be raised to be what I think of as functionally illiterate on this topic. I had opinions, I spouted them freely, I cringe today when I think about that. And part of gaining literacy, and of course that is a lifelong process I will not be finished with, part of gaining literacy has been to understand the kind of collective dimensions of racism, but also how different groups of color get set up differently. So what's in my head about Indigenous peoples is different than what's in my head about Asian heritage people, and that's different than what's in there about African heritage people. I have different levels of comfort and anxiety and interest, etc. And therefore, those groups have different experiences. Okay? And it's very important that we break that down and that we learn those histories and those struggles and those stereotypes and those experiences. So I want to be really clear. All peoples who are not perceived or defined as white experience racism. And they experience it in shared ways, and they experience it in ways that are different depending on their group and its position to whiteness. Having said that, after 20 years of doing this work, I feel very clear about the following. There is something profoundly anti-Black in this culture. And in the white mind, Black people are the ultimate racial other. We have the most energy about Black people. We have the most resentment.
Well, that's because Black people, especially when we're talking about the continent of Africa, Black people have the resources that white people need to maintain their dominance, maintain their wealth. White people need us to remain at a very subservient, very oppressed position so they can continue extracting the resources, whether it's human resources or it's the natural resources out of the ground. Black people and the land of Black people have always been exploited by the white supremacists. It's always been exploited. And Black people will continue to be warred upon. Let's use that word. Black people will continue to be warred upon because that's how white people maintain their dominance and maintain the resources and the wealth that they had. How did white supremacy come to be what it is? What drives the white supremacists? What's the initiator of it? How did we get here? Remember, Europe was poor. We're reading about this on Mondays. We're reading Dr. John Henry Clark, Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust, right? We're reading about this and we're learning that Europe was poor after the Crusades, after all of the internal battles and the plague and everything that has happened in Europe. Europe was poor. So Europe wanted to enrich themselves. Europe wanted power. Europe wanted money, land, power, and resources. Remember, white supremacy, all of the actions that we attribute to the definition of racism, all of those actions were in place before a defined concept of race and racism was around. The system of white supremacy and slavery predates the ideas of race and racism. White supremacy comes first. They were already dominating African people. They were already dominating Caribbean people. They were already dominating non-white people. The idea or the main objective was to go to Asia and dominate those Asian people, but Columbus got lost, ended up in the Caribbean, and they started dominating those people because they realized they had human resources and the resources that they can get out of the ground, right? So why did white supremacy happen? We have to understand that money, power, land, resources. Money, power, land, resources. Racism was created to justify the actions of the white supremacists. Well, we're doing this to these beings because they're not human, they're subhuman. And we can prove that they're subhuman with our flawed science and our flawed psychology and our flawed phrenology and all these social sciences or these soft sciences that were developed out of experimenting upon Black people to try to justify all of the actions of the white supremacy, which was already in motion before a defined concept of race, which came about in the 1600s, which was more crystallized in the 1800s. We talked about this. Go watch the previous videos. We've talked about this before. Tell the full truth.
And anxiety about Black people. And when I have a very short period of time with white people, and I want you to get in touch with your early messages, I ask you to think about Black people. Right? And anti-Blackness, there are poles, right? White is here and Black is here. And I don't have time to get into it, but there is no white without Black. There's a deep need for white, the white collective. There is no superiority without inferiority, right? So there are poles. And anti-Blackness cuts across all groups, including Black people.
Because all groups have benefited off of the exploitation of Black people. Once again, we have no friends. All other groups have benefited off of exploiting Black people.
The darker you are, the more compounded the oppression. And while I'm here to challenge white people in our complacency, there's a very sensitive couple questions I think peoples of color have to ask themselves. One, what does anti-Blackness look like in our group, and who have I aligned with? Right?
We know who you're aligned with. We know who they've aligned with. Them, like all other groups of color, the fake BIPOC stuff, have always aligned themselves with white supremacy for the proximity of whiteness that they can, so they can, benefit from having this proximity to whiteness. We know this. And if you don't know this, you are learning this.
In history, anti-Blackness, it's a system. I want to just give you one glance at the trajectory of anti-Blackness since the beginning of this country to the current time to illustrate those points. And this slide will be deliberately dense, and we can think about it as state-sanctioned organized crime, quite frankly.
So let's rephrase that. So collective white supremacy, which is backed by legal authority and institutional control. State-sanctioned white supremacy prevailing over African Americans. White supremacy is the word and that's one of my issues. Let's stop beating around the bush in this. Let's stop trying to make it nice. Hey, white people, if you're gonna good up the hey, white people, we support the system of white supremacy. We have been supporting this system of white supremacy from the beginning. We're not using the word prejudice or discrimination or all these. White supremacy. We've been conditioned and acculturated to support and prop up the system of white supremacy. She should be saying that.